Welcome to Roadmap to Residency Evidence-Based Applications. Hello everyone, I am Abhiraz. Welcome to our Club 250 Matchmaker sessions. In this video, we will be talking about oxygen transport. So, can we have a 65-year-old man with a history of COPD presents to the emergency department with worsening dyspnea. ABZ analysis reveals decreased oxygen saturation. He reports feeling fatigued and lightheaded. On further examination, his vital signs include a respiratory rate of 28 breaths per minute and a heart rate of 110 beats per minute. Which of the following factors will most likely contribute to the observed decrease in oxygen saturation by shifting the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to the right? Decreased temperature, increased pH, decreased 2,3 BPZ levels, decreased partial pressure of carbon dioxide, decreased hydrogen ion concentration. So the correct answer is C, that is the decreased 2,3 BPZ levels. So the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, which we will discuss in a minute, describes the relationship between the partial pressure of oxygen and the percentage of hemoglobin saturated with oxygen. A shift to the right indicates decreased hemoglobin affinity for oxygen that will lead to the easier unloading of oxygen to tissues. In conditions such as chronic hypoxia, as in COPD, the body compensates by increasing the production of 2,3-BPZ, and this molecule binds to the hemoglobin and reduces its affinity for oxygen, facilitating the oxygen release to tissues. Conversely, decreased level of 2,3-BPZ will shift the curve to the left, increasing hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen and reducing its release to the tissues. Now let's talk about the structure of hemoglobin. So the normal adult hemoglobin is composed of 4 polypeptide subunits, that is 2 alpha and 2 beta chain, that each bind one oxygen molecule. So one hemoglobin binds 4 oxygen molecules. So hemoglobin is an allosteroid protein that exhibits the positive cooperativity when binding to oxygen, such that oxygenated hemoglobin has high affinity for oxygen, that is 300 times, and deoxygenated hemoglobin has low affinity for oxygen, that is promote the release or unloading of oxygen. The protein component of hemoglobin acts as the buffer for H plus ions, and the myoglobin is composed of a single polypeptide chain associated with one heme moiety. So higher affinity for oxygen than hemoglobin in case of myoglobin. Talking about the oxygen content of blood. So the oxygen content equals to the oxygen bound to the hemoglobin plus oxygen solubilized in plasma. So this is the formula that is not generally necessary for the examination. The percent saturation of arterial blood with O2, that is SaO2, and the 0.03 is the solubility constant for oxygen. PaO2 means the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood. So normally the 1 gram hemoglobin can bind 1.34 ml of oxygen. The normal hemoglobin amount in blood is 15 gram per deciliter. The oxygen binding capacity is nearly 20 ml oxygen per deciliter of blood. So whenever there is decreased hemoglobin, there is decreased oxygen content of arterial blood, but there is no change in the oxygen saturation and partial pressure of oxygen in the arteries. The oxygen delivery to the tissues is equal to the cardiac output into the oxygen content of the blood. So in case of carbon monoxide poisoning, the hemoglobin concentration is normal, but the oxygen saturation is decreased because the carbon monoxide competes with oxygen and it gets bound to the hemoglobin. But the partial pressure of oxygen remains normal, and since the oxygen saturation has decreased, the total oxygen content will also decrease. In case of anemia, since there is decrease in the hemoglobin concentration, the total oxygen will decrease. In case of polycythemia, since there is increase in the hemoglobin concentration, there is increase in the RBC, then that will lead to the increased oxygen content. In case of methemoglobinemia, there is decreased oxygen saturation because the ferric ions have the poor affinity at binding for oxygen. In case of cyanide toxicity, everything is normal. Now let's talk about the oxygen hemoglobin or oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. So the shifts in the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve reflect the local tissue oxygen needs. It can be helpful or harmful. Okay. Now the right shift in the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve will lead, which means that there is decreased hemoglobin affinity for oxygen, which means that there is increased oxygen unloading at the tissues. This means that if there is a shift of the curve towards the right, It means that there we can deliver more oxygen towards the tissues, which what we want. So physiologically, it occurs in case of exercise, if there is acidosis, if there is if there is fever, if there is hypoxia. Okay, so hypoxia creates 2,3 BPZ at the cellular level. It is caused by increase in the H plus and increase in the CO2 created by tissue metabolism, or you can also tell that as a Bohr effect. So the left shift in the oxygen and hemoglobin dissociation curve reflects that there is increase in the hemoglobin affinity, which means that the oxygen will not be delivered towards the tissue. So physiologically, it occurs with decrease in the temperature, hypothermia, and pregnancy, because the fetal hemoglobin has higher oxygen affinity than adult hemoglobin. And it also has the increased oxygen binding due to that decreased affinity for 2,3 BPZ. So driving oxygen across placenta to fetus. So pathologically, it will occur in case of carbon monoxide poisoning, methemoglobinemia, and genetic mutation, which can lead to decreased 2,3 BPZ. So in case of right, everything is right. We need more oxygen towards the tissues. In case of left, the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation is lower. So left is lower. So oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve is a sigmoid shape due to the positive cooperativity. That is, for example, yeah, the one hemoglobin, you can see, you know that the one hemoglobin can bind 4 oxygen molecules. So what do you mean by positive cooperativity is that if the first hemoglobin binds, then the second hemoglobin, the binding of second hemoglobin is favored. Also, the third hemoglobin is more favored. The third oxygen molecule is more favored. Ultimately, the fourth oxygen molecule is the most favored to bind. Okay, so if one binds, it will favor the second one, it will favor the third one, it will favor the fourth one. That is called as a positive cooperativity. So myoglobin is a monomeric and thus does not show positive cooperativity, and the curve looks sigmoidal appearance. So what will happen in case of high altitude and exercise? So in case of high altitude, there is decreased atmospheric oxygen pressure. Okay, there is decreased atmospheric oxygen pressure, and there is decreased arterial oxygen, which will lead to increase in the ventilation, and ultimately that will also lead to the decrease in the alveolar CO2, and this will lead to respiratory alkalosis, and that is also called as altitude sickness. So there will be chronic increase in the ventilation, and also the response will be to increase erythropoietin, which will increase the hemoglobin level. The increase in 2,3 BPZ will lead to the increase in the oxygen unloading. That is the curve of the ODC curve will shift towards the right, and there will be increased renal secretion of bicarbonate to compensate for respiratory alkalosis. Response to exercise. So increase the heart rate and increase the stroke volume. Okay, it will lead to the increased pulmonary blood flow, and hence there will be increase in the VQ ratio from base to apex. The cellular respiration will increase, and that will lead to the increased CO2 production and decrease in the pH. And you know that if there is a decrease in the pH, then there will be a right shift of the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So a 55-year-old woman with a history of renal failure presents to the clinic complaining of fatigue and weakness. ABZ analysis reveals decreased oxygen saturation. Lab investigation indicate decreased levels of 2,3 BPZ. Which of the following changes in the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve is most likely contributing to our symptoms? So you know that if there is increase in the 2,3 BPZ, the curve will shift to the right. If there is decreased in the 2,3 BPZ, the curve will shift to the left. Thank you for watching. Keep studying.